Hi, I'm Brad, and this is the Linnea Olson Hackathon, and here's Linnea. So what do you have? What's the good word? Because you told us that you would be able to tell how you felt. How do you feel?
Well, I will say, first of all, I have an active imagination and believe in wishful thinking to a degree, but I swear I took that first pill at 1:30 and fell asleep. And when I woke up, I already had this image of cancer cells being destroyed, and I asked Jess, I said, in a physio or a being like myself, a physical being versus the lab, how long does it take before the drug, the molecule actually interacts with cancer cells? And she kind of answered it, but I thought a good way to think of it is just like when you take an aspirin or an antibiotic, and you start to feel the effects rather rapidly. And yeah, I'm quite certain that that little tiny tablet is going after some cancer right now.
Great to hear. I had a similar experience. It's not about me, but when I had my chemo after my cancer, it literally melted. I could it melted the cancer away within 24 hours. So I'm so pleased to hear this. I was kind of on pins and needles because I figured it could be I feel better or I don't feel better.
No, I know.
Either that's the miracle or it's really bad news. So I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, and Linnea, there are some people who truly study and think it's likely that our own directions to our body, and I'm not necessarily one of these, but because I'm pretty practical science minded, but I did thank my heart when I was struggling post my diagnosis, and also just had wonderful images of one cell, just, again, melting away, that seemed to be more my style than shooting one another, which I also thought of trying to visualize, but I could keep that going. And, that was 18 years ago.
Now my vision is a little more violent. Remember those candies we used to get that we'd put in our mouth and they'd pop and it hurt, but that was part of the thrill. I don't remember what they're called, pop rocks or something. That's what I'm thinking of the cancer doing, just
Well, what else do we have to talk about? that's that's all this is about. This is we're tracking you. We're on the roller coaster that is your journey, going along with you, and it's so good to hear. I don't know if there's anything else anyone other wants to say. Then that's just wonderful news.
I was just wondering, more specifics, Linnea, when did you start with the therapy?
yesterday.
Yesterday, that's what I thought it was. And so
Yeah, and it's once a day.
Once a day, and for what duration?
Until either I have side effects that are not okay, or sorry, I'm tired, or there's a response, or it's clear that there is no response.
Yep.
And in my discussions with Jess leading up to this, my worry was that left lung is a mess, and it's going to be hard to recover. My last draining of the pleural effusion, it was so full of blood. So, I know that this is still a long shot, but I also feel like my body has always been capable of fighting things, but it had gotten to the point where it needed some help. And I'm hoping that this is the appropriate help. Going forward, the mysteries will be side effects, because I'm the third person in the world. So they really know nothing about that yet. They're just guessing. And then Where was I going with that? Obviously, it affects one's brain. I'm writing a blog right now about the concept of compassionate use and, extended access and how important that is, because I want to remind everyone out there that I was not actually eligible for this trial. It is only because of this backdoor mechanism of getting in that I was able to have access. And frankly, the work of a lot of people.
I serve on a scientific ethics advisory board for Roche, and any number of reports we've heard that apparently there's about a 98% approval for such medications, in particular if someone is in a trial or has been in a trial, was in the trial, but maybe the drug did not work, did not go forward to the next phase. But if patients were being benefited, then that the pharmacy had an obligation, certainly an ethical obligation, to permit those patients to continue to receive that. And that was always supported by Roche in general, and they're worldwide, so that sets a standard. But I have frankly never heard of outside a trial setting.
Right, this is unusual.
Yeah, so that's really remarkable, and there hopefully that can be discussed more than just in this small circle.
Yep, I agree.
Himary, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Linnea, do you know the actual dosage that they're giving you?
1 milligram. It's just tiny.
Actually, that sounds like a lot. It depends on the drug.
Right.
But back on the point about compassionate use in the blog post you're writing, I think that came up in our last conversation, and how I think it's, and maybe Peggy or Kimmery or Jeff, maybe but it seems to me that there was some articles that said that people aren't taking advantage of it as much as they might. Like it's not being used very much. So maybe 98% of those who apply get approved, but very few people are actually applying. And there was some article I thought I read that said it was sort of critiquing this, this right to try kind of legislation that's not being used as much as it might be.
Well, my guess is that it's it's the burden of all the paperwork and just busy practices, especially community practices, where arguably you would want greater access to this type of a program, but they're also the ones least likely to have the time to jump through all the hoops to do it. So I think that's a big part of it.
Wouldn't you say also, Kimmery, that it would be that the community oncologist, let us say, who is less likely to be able to make a cogent argument for that particular patient's use of that drug? I'm just always concerned that patients are not being served properly when they have a rare cancer or a rarer situation, and it's unless they're in a center of excellence.
Yeah, I think there's some of that. Definitely just being aware of even like keeping, like who has the time to even keep up on what's in everyone's pipeline, right? To even know what's available as a compassionate use. And even if you do know what's in everyone's pipeline, it doesn't mean that they're like, I reached out to Calathera, for example, because they have some interesting stuff, and none of it, and they do have a compassionate use program theoretically, and their products just aren't ready to be used that way yet. So you're right. So now that's me as a private citizen inquiring in general, but if I had some top-notch doctor calling them up and saying, "Hi, I have a patient I really need to give this to, and I need you guys to work with me," I think they could probably sway them.
I think I would just add, I agree with what Kimmery said. I actually moderated 2 panels for a London summit on compassionate use. They call it expanded access programs. in January of this year, 2 different panels. And a couple things I would say. One is, because I have a document, I think I mentioned last week, that explains the compassionate use programs in every country, every foreign country, doesn't include the US for some reason, but every foreign country of the world. It lists it's maybe a 35-page PDF PowerPoint file that lists the procedures in every country in the world for obtaining compassionate use access to drugs. So that's one thing. Second thing is a number of members of my panel included a woman that I think very highly of named Naomi Litchfield, who works, this is what her company focuses on, securing compassionate use access for patients in the UK. It's called BioEMAS is the name of the firm. So that's what they do. They're worked on that. And so my panel included an interesting woman from Janssen Therapeutics. So they have people in most of the big pharma firms focused on their compassionate use program. So this woman's name was Christine McCracken, but that's her focus. Do you know her? You know her?
We used to work together at the NCCN.
Yeah, she's very good. She was on my panel. She was actually, so what we did is I led 2 panels, and sometimes what I do at these summits is I try to get to be the last person to speak, and I try to summarize the whole summit sometimes. Sometimes the moderator does that. She was the host of day 2, so she and I co-led after the summit ended audience questions, and it worked out really well. So she's very good. She's in Philly. She's based in Philly, or that's where she lives anywhere, but she works for Janssen now. But you know, she's actively involved in overseeing the compassionate. So it's not like you're writing to pharma and there's no one on the other side, or that they, you know, they answer their phone once a month or something. They have people there that are now looking at it. So another funny angle is my panel also included a former 35-year FDA guy, and he was worried, I forget his last name, Richard was his first name. He was worried that pharma was going to start using compassionate use to avoid clinical trials, to be gathering the data sort of in a preliminary way without it being sort of tracked as closely as clinical trials, and maybe to change their acceptance criteria for clinical trials or something like that. So he said,
Wasn't Richard Pazder, was it?
no, I know him too, but it wasn't him. No, he's very senior.
Sounds like not like something he would say.
No. I know him also, but no, this guy had been for like decades in HIV space. I can look it up for you afterwards, but, and I'm not sure he was. I know other people at the FDA, and I know you know Amy, but I'm not sure he was necessarily representative of the FDA, but he'd been there for, you know, like I said, his whole career. So those were some of my panelists, as well as a patient foundation based in Toronto. So the other thing that's happening is patient foundations are also taking a role in pushing for compassionate use, for particularly a patient foundation like I know Donna Cryer at Global Liver Institute. So they're focused on liver disease, including liver cancer, but all you know, cirrhosis and other liver diseases. So they're pushing for compassionate use for their members.
So to pick up on another thread we had from last time, Linnea, an angle on this would be, once you get compassionate use, giving back and doing that patient-reported survey that Kimry was kind enough to send you, and the discussion we had about that. But that would be one way also to kind of get around the argument about not capturing that data because it's not in a clinical trial. And you know, so you're essentially getting real-world evidence, you know, that is complementary perhaps to the clinical trial data.
My sense is they'll capture the data if they want to, you know, that if
it's good data.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest issues with compassionate use, at least the way it's written now, is the requirements. You have to have a life-threatening illness, and that's a rather broad category, but you have to have exhausted all other possibilities. So now we're talking about a very narrow shoot where time is of the essence. You know, you most likely are quite sick, and yet you're trying to pull this all together. So that part is hard. And I personally view the whole compassionate use thing as win-win, obviously for the patient, but I think they are going to capture data that they're going to find useful. And at a certain point in time, maybe they will understand the benefit to them as well.
I think the issue that you can really provide, however, is your own sense of response in regard to side effects. And I think especially if there's need for you to discuss side effects with somebody, you need to know who that party is, not necessarily in your own right now with your current doctors, but access to the people who understand the drug best of all. Because if the goal is to keep you on it as long as possible with manageable side effects versus intolerable side effects, and the management plan, that would be of value, not just to you, obviously, but beyond that. So I would love to see that as a mechanism of somehow, which, you know, I think Kimri's also addressed.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably too early for them to even have any sort of dose de-escalation plans or anything like that. So it really is very experimental. And I just wanted to make a slight distinction. Jeff, you had mentioned both expanded access and compassionate use. And I think expanded access is a bigger umbrella term under which compassionate use is one mechanism, right? And usually expanded access programs to pharma, to big pharma, mean it's really in the context of a trial. So it's a larger program where they allow patients to sort of roll over from other protocols and or continue receiving drug, you know, or post the period that their original clinical trial, you know, mandated, et cetera, et cetera. And there is a lot of, and I'm just wondering if your FDA person kind of was pushing back a little bit on that, because there is a little bit of a, you know, expanded access programs are used sort of strategically by pharma companies as well. You can kind of mess up someone else's trial by opening an expanded access program.
Yep.
Because patients roll off of one drug and get it on another. And what that does is it actually messes up the overall survival endpoint for the original clinical trial. So companies don't like they can be threatening, you know, depending on what the competitive landscape is. So I think pharma gets a lot of pushback, like, why don't you have more of these? But I think the general public may not quite appreciate that can really, you know, really mess up endpoints of clinical trials, not only for their programs, but even for other companies' programs. So.
Yeah, I think that's true. And then obviously when you get further down the road, the payers get involved too, if it ends up getting approved and now it's a part of a reimbursement, you know, payer reimbursement program. And they have the same thing. They, you know, they try to get you to take the less expensive drugs first even if you're a candidate for another drug. You know, they call it step therapy, but most people call it fail first.
Prior authorization.
If you wanted the hepatitis C drugs, you had to show liver damage before you could get them. So.
But I am a big fan of compassionate use, because I think, you know, it kind of gets around that expanded access thing a little bit too, because this really is much more like, I don't know, I want to say legit. Expanded access programs are legit too, but yeah, I don't know. I just feel like there's somehow, yeah, more patient-centric and just individualized. So I don't know.
It's that word compassion. But you know what, Kimry, on the FDA site, they use the two terms interchangeably. It's interesting.
Yeah, pharma doesn't. Pharma is very specific about one or the other. And you're right. Like the big pharma companies usually assign someone from the medical affairs group to be, you know, oversee whether they're running an expanded access program or just in charge of sort of access in general. But the smaller biopharma companies don't have that. They don't have the luxury of like having that position. So it's just, and I think that's the case, like, again, I called Calathera, but it went into an answering machine from their medical affairs department, and someone was assigned to it, but it was probably their 12th hat that they're wearing for the company. So they didn't get back to me. I actually never got a call back, but I got an email back like 3 weeks after the fact, which is,
You know, the other thing that is unusual about my situation, and this was brought up earlier, but that I need to explore more, is being granted this status prior to it actually opening in trial.
what do you mean, Linnea? I didn't quite get
Well,
that.
it's in trial in Australia. There are 2 people who are enrolled there, but it's not, for instance, it's not in trial yet at MGH. So, I mean, this is truly outside of the auspices or whatever you want to call it. I mean, and the advantage for me is Jess pretty much gets to write the protocol and control it.
Is there another site in the US which also is running this trial or is in the process of opening the trial? I'm thinking of you're needing, somebody within a time zone.
I heard this open in California,
And where in California?
UC Davis.
UC Davis. Okay. Call me if you need a number there for somebody who's an oncologist.
Okay, Linnea, starting the wrap-up process. I asked you last week, what can we do to help? And you sort of said, stay tuned. And the next 2 weeks are critical. So I assume that's the same way we should be operating.
Yeah. And I do have a bit of personal information to share that to me is maybe even more exciting than this. And that is that my youngest son got a new job and he's going to be working for Mercy Bioanalytics in their labs as a cancer researcher.
Ooh.
So mama's proud.
Yeah, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That's great. And he's not the one you were concerned about. This is a different.
Yes, there's always one to be concerned about.
Linnea, I've grown quite fond of you and connected to you in these like Zoom universes, and to hear you laughing again, I can't tell you just how amazing that is, and to see you well. So we're rooting for you, sending you good vibes all over the world, country. Just
Thank
like
you.
totally made my day to hear you laugh.
Thank you. And I'm hoping a week from now, I'll be feeling that much better. It's possible.
We're wanting to see some artwork a week from now. Some new art.
Let the poor girl rest.
No way. No way.
I've been resting for a couple of months now.
Well,
Yeah,
the kind of rest that comes with knowing you're getting better is a different one than when you're feeling
Totally
forced to rest because
Yep.
you're sick. So
yep.
enjoy.